Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Universe Within podcast. Today, I sat down with my friend Safa, and like many of my previous guests, I met Safa working at the Amazonian Plant Healing Center, the Temple of the Way of Light. She originally came down as a yoga teacher, and she has a really long history. She lived in India for a long time. She studied various yogic traditions, and she's really into something called Pranic Healing. And eventually she began facilitating also at the temple and working with plant medicine. So she has a really interesting story. She's very familiar with plants. She's done a lot of dieting. Her partner, Felix, was actually on a couple episodes ago, and they work together here in the Sacred Valley of Peru. So she has a really deep well of knowledge of different yogic traditions, of working with plants, of doing the training herself, and now stepping into the role of someone who actually works and administers these plants. So I really enjoy talking to her. She has a lot of wealth and knowledge to share, and I think you guys will really enjoy this episode. If you can go on YouTube and hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, that would really help in getting this podcast out, as well as going on to Apple Podcasts and leaving a starred review or starred rating and a short review. That really helps with the algorithms. And also, if you're able to support financially, that's a really big help. You can do direct donation, or a really good way is Patreon, patreon.com. There's a link in the show notes. And for just $1 or $2 a month, or up to a bit more than that, you can subscribe, and you get a lot of really nice added benefits, early access to shows, Q&As, and also extended interviews. So with this interview, Safa went into some practices, some breath practices, and some offering practices that she really finds beneficial, and she explains how to do those. So you can get access to that on Patreon. So I hope you guys enjoy this show. Thank you for the support. And without further ado, here's Safa. Cool. Well, welcome. It's good to see you.
Yeah, thank you.
So I met you, like so many people on this show, I met you when we were working at the Temple of the Way of Light, although I think our paths crossed somewhat. I think maybe when you first came down, because you first came down as a teacher?
I was doing the yoga teaching.
Right.
Yeah, while I was there, yeah.
So I think I was either dieting, or I had finished my dieting and I was working outside the temple. I think that's when you first came down, but you came down for like a few months or something, and then you left, and then you came back, or what was the story with that? Because I'm actually not exactly sure.
Well, at the time I was teaching yoga, not just at the temple, but around the world, and I was only supposed to come for 5 months. I had this calling. I think 2 years prior, I'd come to do a dieta in Peru for my first time the year before, and interestingly enough, right at the end of the dieta, I was like, and I always do offerings, if there's any way that I can come back to Peru and work with the medicine here, please make it happen. And I took everything from my tambo that I thought was a cool offering, and I put it in the earth, and I let it go. And about 5 months later, I got a call from Sasha that worked there, asking me if I wanted to come to work at the temple. So I was like, oh my God, here we go, first manifestation. And so I came, and it was supposed to be for 5 months, but then I met Felix, who's now my partner of 5 years, and just never left, really. We left the temple, but we haven't left Peru. And I just let the rest of the teaching go that I was doing overseas, because it was like my energy was supposed to be here. I could really feel it. Yeah.
So I was reading a little on your website, the Body of Prana, is that the name? You have and I knew this from you from before, but you have a really long kind of history of working with yoga. Yeah, you spent a long time in India, and what was that like, or what got you interested in yoga?
I think it kind of dovetailed off this search that had been going on for a long time about energy and prana, hence the name Body of Prana. But it was, I guess, this evolution of, okay, yeah, I'm learning how to work with energy, but I know that there's more to this, and I don't think there's any mistakes. because I went to India. Like, I'd been teaching yoga for a year actually in Canada, which is really funny that, you'd actually teach people for a year before being certified, but sometimes it works that way. And then I ended up going to India, and, when you think of yoga teacher trainings, what I thought it was in America or Canada, that, you learn your asana and your anatomy and how to market and all these kind of like Western things. And I end up going to a place where they'd never had Westerners before at all. And so they were having us for the first time there. And it was interesting. They had a delegation from Taiwan at the same time. So it was a bunch of Taiwanese Buddhist nuns and monks that were there. And the entire training was a lot of it being 4 hours of philosophy a day in a very tiny room, which is important. I mean, the philosophy, that's the main part of it, right? And then getting it translated into Taiwanese. So it was like trying to stay awake in the heat. And it was an interesting experience because there was so much of me that resisted it. I wanted to get something that was marketable and something I could use when I got back to Canada. And it was nothing about that. It was actually about getting to the core of it. The heart of yoga, which is, I think, getting to that which gets in the way of seeing yourself as you are. And it was very interesting because this particular school, it was called the Lakulish School of Yoga. And the founder of this school, he was a student of Swami Kripaluvanand, which he was a teacher in India that actually had two main disciples. And one of them was Rajarshi Muni, which is the teacher that I studied with at this Lakulish school. And the other one was Amrit Desai. And Amrit ended up coming to America and started the Kripalu Yoga Center, which you probably for reader or listeners might be familiar with. And his big thing, this whole lineage, was the idea of giving Shaktipat to the students. So Shaktipat, for those who aren't familiar, is a transmission of divine energy from the guru to the disciple. And so Amrit was very good at doing this, basically having people come in the room and doing the ever magic that they do. And what starts to happen is, as they explain it, prana starts to move through the body. So if prana's stuck in a certain place, the body will actually start to flick itself or move itself, or you'll speak in tongues, or you'll start to hit yourself on the head or dance or whatever it is to free the blocked prana. So he started giving these Shaktipats in America, and he became quite famous about it, and this whole school started up around him. But as gurus do, he ended up preaching celibacy as one of the main tenets of the school, and down the road, he was later discovered that his senior students and himself weren't quite practicing celibacy, so it was quite a thing when that school ended. But going across the pond to Rajarshi Muni, he really stuck true to the principles. As far as we all know now, he's quite old, and I'm sure he's in his late 80s, so I'm sure he's really stuck to it. But I came across it, and so I know it's a long story, but I was in BC, and this guy had come that was living there, and he said, "Oh, you have to meet the Swami that's coming to town." And I said, "Okay." So he ended up having me come to his house and meet the Swami, and the Swami pulled me into this back room, and he says, "Oh, I'm going to give you mantra diksha." And at the time, I didn't know any of it, but I was so excited about having something like direct from India that felt really like real. And just, I call it following the golden thread. It's like when you go through life and you feel like, I have to do this. I don't know why, and I don't know anything about that school, but I knew I needed to go. And that experience of having that energy transmission, which is what the Diksha is, woke something up in me. And I found out that they were doing a teacher training in India, and I decided to go, and literally the explanation was half a paragraph on a piece of paper. And I went on a wing and a prayer. And so when I got there, like I said, it was doing a lot of this philosophy and 4 hours of asana, just watching 20-year-old students fold themselves into pretzels and then them saying, "You do." And I didn't know, I couldn't do it, no anatomy really per se. And a lot of starvation. They were really encouraging us to be thin and not eat very much. So imagine after 3 weeks, like I think I dropped 15 pounds in 3 weeks, which was amazing. Wow. And but then towards the end, they said, "Well, we hope you're lucky enough to receive Shaktipat from Rajarshi Muni." And so I kind of latched onto this idea. well, it's been really hard and really awful, but there's this thing at the end, and I hope that, we get to do it. So we went to a different ashram, and at the end, and we met him, and I thought, oh, okay, we're going to do it now. And then, no, nothing. So I went back to my room, and I remember just sitting on my porch. It had been such a hard month, and I was crying, and I'm like, if there's any way this can happen, like, do I deserve this? I pray, please, 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 please. If it's supposed to be, let it happen. And it felt like a real deep, deep prayer. And sure enough, the next morning, the Swami comes up. He says, okay, 8 of you are going to receive the Shakti pot. So come on down tomorrow. Don't eat anything. And that was it. So the whole day I'm like, oh my goodness, okay. So we get down there, and there's a bunch of mats all laid out. And he says, okay, start your breathing, So we do this Nadi Shodhana, which is an alternate nostril breath for a while. And he says, whatever happens, relax. Okay, so we relax. And then sure enough, I feel my hands lift in the air on their own, like with no kind of effort at all. And then my head starts spinning side to side. Boom, 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 boom. And I'm like, what the hell is happening? But at the same time, I'm like, this is real magic, And then for the next 2 hours, I watched the room and myself. I mean, I was so focused on myself, but doing asana, I could never have done on my own. I had so much power coursing through my body. People were chanting in tongues. People were walking up and down, singing. It was a cacophony of 8 people, plus there was a few Indian people there as well. And afterwards, we sat down and everyone was super silent. And one of the men there was an Indian Ayurvedic doctor. He says, you hypnotized us. How could you do that? And he was so upset, and he storms out of the room. And it's kind of a funny story, but we went to lunch and everyone was very silent because no one had been through an experience like that before, And we get back to the room after lunch, and they say, as I have experienced in India many times, the idea of personal space is very different than that in North America. Mm-hmm. And they said, just so you know, we videotaped you. So without our knowledge, they had this camera and they were zooming in. So imagine there's tears and mucus and things coming out your eyes and nose, and they wanted us to see the experience of what was happening, which was quite intense and intimidating to watch yourself go through this explosion of prana in the body. So we had a second session of it in the afternoon, and I think the thing that hit me the most was at the very end, the Ayurvedic doctor came up with tears streaming down his face, and he bowed at the feet of a Joshi Muni. He says, I understand now. And to me, I felt in that day that I actually experienced what yoga was about. It wasn't about asana. It wasn't about a bikini. It wasn't about any of the things that I thought it was about. It was, and that was just one layer of it. That was just the layer of prana. But that in itself enlivened this search to understand how prana works, its intelligence. It became a lifelong interest after that day. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yoga as well, but not the yoga that we're used to. So when I got back to the West, it was an interesting journey to take something like that and get in front of a class and teach asanas for 45 minutes. Mm-hmm.
So this idea of prana, I think it comes from the root word breath, right? Mm-hmm. And it's from
life force.
Life force, yeah. And from this more Indian point of view, it's kind of this vital energy that we all have, mm-hmm. maybe similar to like qi in Chinese.
Or ki, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so you do a lot of work with prana. What's the idea behind that? Like how does one begin to cultivate that or work on that? And how does that look like if you're doing that?
I think for me, it started reading a book by Starhawk, The Fifth Sacred Thing, and there was a character in the book that could heal people with their hands. And for some reason, I just was enamored with the idea that what if the world were to break down and we didn't have medicines and all we had was our hands? How could we help one another? Mm. And to me, that just spurred a search to start to look for these different schools or people that worked with energy. And so the idea with the school that I did find initially was Pranic Healing. And the idea there was that the body has prana that it uses to repair itself. And all Pranic Healing does is try to increase that level of prana in the body so the body can heal itself. So there's not really much magic about it. It's literally cleaning what's in the way, putting some energy in and sealing it. And that's it. And that's the basic tenets that they teach when you first start.
And that's actually not that foreign of a concept, because I think a lot of people maybe don't realize, I mean, even a lot of Western medicine, pharmaceuticals even, they're often just stimulating the body's own healing mechanism.
Exactly. So there was no woo-woo about it to me. Actually, that school felt super grounded in their methods and their approach. They had, basically like different ways that you go through systematically to work on something like pneumonia or spinal problems or, I mean, any kind of thing you can think of, basically some of the textbooks, like there's just protocols to go through for everything. And I really like that about it. Like coming from a scientific background, I studied science in university, and it was like, I like this. You go through the steps, and then there's a result. You go through the steps, and there's a result. I can get behind this, But that's one part of me, and there was another part of me that has always really looked for, magic's great. I could live in the realm of unicorns all day long and have great imaginations like you do in ceremony, but if I can't bring it down to earth and make something tangible happen, then what's the point? So for me, the whole thing really spurred when I went to have a session with my teacher. And I can honestly say it was the first time I met my first magician in the world. I sat down, and at the time, what brought me to the energy work, not just the curiosity, but also living in a world that felt really devoid of using any real big part of my brain. in a sense of like, okay, I work in a corporate job and there's sales projections and quarterly aspirations and sales calls. And it was just like, is this it? And I was pretty depressed that if this was it. And when I sat down for my first session, she started working on me, and it literally felt like someone was pulling boulders off my body. It was very tangible. I'm like, am I imagining this? No, I actually am really feeling better. And then it started to get to a point where I started to feel really nauseous. And it felt like a shamanic experience, but at the time I didn't even know what that was. And I jumped up, and I thought I was going to be sick, and then I was in her sink, and I was just sick and sick and sick. And she just held me, and she's like, it's okay. And I stood up at the end, and I looked at her. And at the time, her eyes looked to me like a universe, like there was just stars. It's like she morphed and changed in that moment. And she looked at me, and she says, now you know. And it was one of the deepest transmissions. I don't even know how to explain it. And in that moment, I'm like, yeah, I see now. This is what I've been looking for my entire life. I've been waiting for somebody to open this door. Get emotional talking about it. And she goes, go sit outside on the lawn. And so I lie back on the lawn, and I open my eyes, and it literally looks like white lights or little sparkles that are all coming out of my chest. And again, coming from a scientific background, I'm like, how do I explain this? This is really weird. I feel so joyful, like I haven't felt in years, and there's light coming up, and what's happening? And I feel like I'm on an acid trip. The flowers are really beautiful. I haven't taken anything. And for the next 3 days, I was in this state of euphoria because some door had opened to me that had been closed for a while, but I knew I'd been there before. And ever since then, I was hooked. It was like, that's my path. My parents are going to think I'm nuts, that I quit my corporate job and want to wave crystals around, but c'est la vie. This is what it is. And that's where the journey of prana really started.
So what is the training like for that? I mean, is it something, like you mentioned, this idea of just this direct transmission from teacher to student? Mm-hmm. Is there something more you have to do to cultivate that, to be able to work with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a lifelong thing that never ends. You're constantly trying to figure out how to unblock the doors of prana, how to use your mind as a transmitter of consciousness, and the more limited you are by being able to reach out and manipulate consciousness, the more limited you are in being able to manipulate prana. And so I think the more that you open up, more flows through. But in terms of the training, now going back, 16 years when I first started, it was very rudimentary compared to like where things are now, I would say. But the way they teach you is basically going through to understand prana, to start to actually feel it with your hands. So they train you to sensitize your hands so that you can actually scan what a chakra feels like, how wide it is, if it's in a congested state or a depleted state. So you start to get a sense of feeling literally what prana feels like, that bioplasmic energetic field around our body, being able to scan it like you would see those Kirlian photography. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like being able to scan the edges of those. And over time, it takes practice, because a lot of people, they're like, oh, this sounds amazing. And I've watched people go through it, but then they get really nervous about, is this right? Am I scanning the right thing? Is this just my mind? You know, and these are all the kind of things you have to go through, because first and foremost, anything you step on has to be about faith. You have to believe in yourself first and foremost. Actually, let's step back from that. You have to believe in the channel that you're opening, you know? And the more that faith grows, as Master would say, Master Choa, it's like you open up a channel. He calls it the antakarana, or the spiritual cord. And basically the wider the spiritual cord is, like the more divine energy pours down. And so what opens that is service, is meditation, is, those are the two main ones. But doing the healing work as well, also, it's like you're pulling energy in and giving it out. And it's like this river that's flowing through you, that's consistently washing you. And allowing more energy to come down, you know? Mm. So that's one piece of it. But this idea of transmission from the teacher is important, I think, anyway. And this is part of me that is the traditionalist. Before Master passed away in 2007, they knew that he was starting to become sick. He actually died of pneumonia. But what happened was, we were all together at a conference, and he was supposed to be there in November of 2006. And basically what happened was, he wasn't able to come, but they basically got him on the phone, and they said, okay, he's going to give a transmission to all the students, you know? So for 3 days, we did intensive cleaning, meditation, dipping in these pools, like putting bathing suits on and going in the pool, and the masters would like charge the water to clean the water. It was interesting, you know, and I just went along with it. And then at the last day, they made us sit in a particular position, which was really awkward. Like, I try to describe it, but like sitting on your heel, arms doing a certain mudra, whatever it was. And then he got on the phone from the Philippines and basically did his transmission. And again, it was like for a couple of days after that, I felt very euphoric. Okay, something's going on here. And if you were to scan your energy centers before and after, you definitely notice a difference. Like there's something. The idea with all of this work is trying to increase the size of the chakras so that you have a capacity to bring more energy down. So that's the whole idea, is like, how do we stretch the chakras to be able to hold more, and then get them to communicate with one another, you know? So if I have an idea here, my CEO says, do this. My root says, yeah, I'll get up and do it. No problem. No blockage. I'm going to go. So when we get this transmission of the teacher, this capacity grows. And it was the same with this transmission from Rajarshi Muni. I really think that unblocking of the prana did something, because he said, you are going to be able to do this now anytime you want. And so the idea is, when we go home and we sit in meditation, as I just wait and let that energy start to flow, and sure enough, like I can get to the point where my hands are hitting, speaking in tongues and doing all these things. And it's the prana just trying to clean itself. But he said what they basically do is open or unblock the prana in our root. So like in Kundalini Yoga, they talk about, you know, the yoga being unblocked in each and every one of the centers till we reach awakening, you know. So this was like getting a lift up. Here you go, I'm going to open that first one for you, because you're karmically, as he said, entitled to do so. Is it because I've worked on energy with people in past lives? I don't know. But he said, we've been student and teacher many lifetimes, and we'll see you again next lifetime. So I think that's an important part, and it's an important part of Indian tradition, you know.
You mentioned this idea of unblocking, and that was something Felix was also talking about when he was talking about, for him, something really important in the dieting process is actually it's a process of letting go. And that's a really common archetype that I think one can see in all sorts of shamanic paths, that this idea of dying, that it's actually a process of letting things go, so that something, whatever that is that you want to call it, prana or a life force or a connection, that it has that ability to actually open up and fully express itself. Is that kind of a similar thing? Is just maybe some of the training is just trying to let go of these blocks or these boundaries that we're holding on to, so that we can actually be closer to who we truly are?
Definitely. I mean, the prana body, what I'm realizing now 16 years later is like the prana body is just one layer of us. And there's so many more layers beyond that, like the astral body. That's one people are familiar with because they understand astral travel or lucid dreaming. But there's not much education in our society about what to do, how to access that. And I think, with the prana, it's like as an example, if I have someone on the table and I'm doing work with them, it's like I can sense in my body where they're feeling stuck. Maybe they feel like a sense that they can't breathe. Maybe there's a sense of nausea in their stomach or fire or anger, whatever it is. And we work through the prana body to move things and clear things out so that there's a bit more space, and I think, oh, okay, I feel better. Oh, that energy feels gone. But then once you start to have an ability of seeing the astral, and sometimes you can see that moment where it's almost like their energy lifts up past beyond the prana body, and not energy is a bad word. It's like a consciousness, because we're layers of consciousness, but they have a conscious experience of something beyond or above or beside their body. And they get that moment of being free and more expanded than they usually are. And wow, I'm experiencing myself not just as this body lying here, or as the prana kind of flowing through me. I'm experiencing myself as the size of this room. And wow, it's so free, and I can breathe, and then they go back in, Mm-hmm. And so this can be the same experience in lucid dreaming, Oh, I can do anything I want to. I'm not obligated by the rules of the physical world. Mm-hmm. I can travel, I can meet a teacher, I can heal somebody, whatever it is. And then we come back in. And this right now is what's really exciting me, because this world is starting to open more, and I'm less confined by the physical world, by Facebook and what's ever there and all these sorts of things. It's like, yeah, that's great, but or a quarantine or whatever it is. Maybe the quarantine has been the thing that's taught me how to fly, So yeah, I think all these paths lead us towards that which limits us as really being something that's false. But we have to break through, like Felix was saying, the circle of Ananya, the circle of the people who know. It's like it's very difficult to get through. And whatever circumstances lead us there, some people it's depression or sadness or a health crisis or whatever it is. But like, man, am I grateful to be pushed to keep looking,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you think some of these things, I mean, obviously for some of the audience, I'm sure they'll resonate with what you're saying, and some are like, what the F is she talking about? Mm-hmm. Do you think some of these things, I mean, obviously, I often use like metaphors of martial arts because that's something I practice. But I mean, for me, like a martial art, anyone can learn it. It's I often think it's almost like plant medicine too. Like ayahuasca, for example. Like ayahuasca doesn't discriminate against anyone, but everyone might not be ready for ayahuasca too. So
definitely,
and I think it's like a similar thing with martial arts. Like anyone can practice, but not everyone is going to be great. It just maybe they're not really into it, or maybe their body isn't ready for it. So, do you think some of these things, can anyone just through sheer work and dedication really open to this, or some of these things maybe kind of with the uniqueness of people, certain people just are more in tune with certain things, or they're drawn to a certain path that allows that path to open up, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there has to be the inclination for sure. There has to be the faith in it, because if you don't think it's real, then you're not going to spend your time there for sure. And like I said, for me, I kept having these tangible experiences that were like kicks in the head. And I was like, I can't ignore this. Something here is happening. So that encouraged me. In Pranic Healing, they say that everyone has the ability to sense prana. And it's interesting because 15 years ago, when I watched people go through the training, it was more difficult for people to sense energy. I saw a lot more people, this is quite difficult. I don't really feel anything. And even Master Ko, one of the main teachers in that school, he said for the first 3 months he didn't feel anything. But he really had some sort of faith in the teacher. He's like, okay, well, this guy seems to know what he's talking about, so I'm just going to do it anyway. And that's always the first part of anything, is like, even if I'm not quite sure about it, there has to be that faith element, or it's just not real. In terms of faith, the story that comes to mind, I remember listening to, it was a lama that teaches here, or teaches in the States. And she was telling a story about this lama that had come to her monastery, and basically had this rock, and he was known for being able to put thumbprints in them, which is crazy. Like, how do you, like, think about the physics of trying to use your thumb to push it into a rock? It's kind of beyond belief, And he looked at her and he said, okay, I'm ready to do it, but I need you to go get the people of faith. She's like, okay. So she goes to the kitchen and she gathers all the people and brings them back and sits them around. And he goes into this, like, he starts, I believe he was like singing some sort of mantra, or scripture, something like this, generating this energy, and and he does this mantra, I can't remember what it was, and basically puts his thumbprint into the rock. And so he hands it to her, and she looks, and sure enough, there's this thumbprint in the rock, and she can see the lines of his fingerprint. And she turns it over, and the other side actually looked seared, like the fingerprint didn't go in that side. And he looks at it and he goes, there was someone here who didn't believe. This Buddhist monk. So not everyone in this room had faith, he said, because normally if everyone here has total faith, both sides work. So there's these beings that have been put on earth to kind of wake us up out of our slumber of that's not true, cynicism, these sorts of things. And not everybody comes across those experiences, because maybe it's not time. Maybe they're not supposed to do that work. They're here to do some grounded earthy work, and that's just as valid. But I think if we come across those things like the thumbprint in the stone, how do we deny it? And that lama, she said, my son, he was he was a microbiologist, very much a skeptic. And she said, now he's been on 4-year-long Buddhist retreats after that experience that day.
I mean, it's a really common thing even in Western medicine. And I think many, not all, but I think many, certainly a lot of the medical doctors I know, if one is really to inquire into them, I think that's something that most either would admit or even maybe subconsciously recognize, that faith in that medicine is extremely important. There's countless examples of, there's one really famous case of a guy, and he was terminally ill with maybe it was cancer or something. I don't remember, but and it was kind of interesting because it was an ethical question from the doctors, but they had no other solution, so they decided to do this, and they said they lied to him, but they said this new drug has just come out, and it's been proven to cure this ailment. And he started taking it, and his symptoms went away. He regressed.
And it was a placebo.
It was a placebo, yeah. And then somehow, I forget, but maybe one of the nurses or something broke the news against the doctor's orders, and they said, hey, actually, this is just a placebo. And all the symptoms came back, and he died. But yeah, that faith is, and I think that's something we all know too. Like you said, like any practice we do, even if I want to learn the piano, I have to have faith that's a potentiality, that I can do that. Mm-hmm. And without that, if we're just constantly saying, I'm never going to learn this is never going to work, it's probably not.
Yeah. I think, like I said, and just to reiterate that part about faith, it's not just blind faith, but those experiences that feel tangible, like the thumb and the stone, like me being cured of addiction from having this experience with my teacher, I've got one more if you want.
Sure, yeah.
I think in 2008, I was doing some healing work with the Pranic Healing school at the Vancouver. There was a healing convention in Vancouver. And my teacher, she pokes me. She says, I want you to come here. And so she leads me over to this table, and there's a Chinese man sitting there. And she goes, I want you to do something. I want you to scan his aura for gold. I'm like, okay. Which is a thing, with Pranic Healing, you learn to be able to scan anything. My level of prosperity, whatever. So I'm scanning, and I scan, oh, yeah, this is very rare, because normally scanning gold in an aura is not a very common thing, because part of gold building into your aura, building the gold body. This is a much more advanced yogic practice. It's like where you really build the dantian and start channeling gold energy in there. This is like the Buddhic state or these sorts of things. But here's someone that's got this gold energy in their field. And so my teacher says, when there's a healer with gold energy, you always try to get work from them. And I'm like, oh, okay. So at the time in 2008, I mean, I had quit the corporate job and I was, doing everything I could to try to make money, but there wasn't much happening at the time. And I walk over and, the cost for a 15-minute healing was, I think, $200 and something at the time. And I'm like, oh my God, this is for 15 minutes. Who does this guy think he is? But I listened to my teacher. I had faith in her. Yeah. Put my credit card down and sat with him for 15 minutes. And he did some things, hit me over the head with a book and signed the book. And I thought, oh, that's really disappointing. Like, okay, I'll sleep with your book under my head and maybe it'll do something. I didn't really feel much, And so later on that day, he was up on stage and they started showing these videos of him. His name was Dr. Zigong Sha. And he's like a Chinese medicine doctor, Western doctor, Taoist Grand Master. He had all these like titles, But my teacher had said gold energy. So they show videos of him getting someone to walk out of a wheelchair, someone who's blind, now they can see, like real Jesus stuff, I'm like, come on, this isn't real. And so they asked us in the audience, does anyone have lower back pain or knee problems, So I put my hand up at the time. Okay, well, come on up. And there was like 10 of us. And they start doing the sweeping and energizing and, oh yeah, okay, I notice I feel a little bit better, a little bit more ability. I can squat, feels easier. Cheer, everybody. Okay, great. And as I'm walking down, he looks up on the stage, and there's probably about 300 people in the audience. He goes, you, come up here on stage. I'm like, oh God. So I get up there, and he says, okay, which knee hurts the most? I said, my right knee. He says, okay. So he starts to get the crowd to start chanting. This, whatever it was, I don't remember at the time. It was all kind of a blur because it was a lot of energy coming at me at once. But basically he was chanting and doing something. And then basically he goes, bah, and he hit me over the head, just like that monk with the stone. It was the same thing. And I had so much emotion come up. Like I started to cry, but I was trying to keep it together because there's 300 people in the audience at least watching me. So I gather myself together and okay, thank you very much, and I go down the stairs and the disciples of his are like, oh, you're very lucky for a healing like that from Dr. Zigong Sha. And I'm like, okay, but I'm just really disoriented and I don't know what's happening. And so I had to go back to Vancouver Island, and it requires an hour and 40-minute ferry. And the moment I got on the ferry, my stomach started hurting so bad, hurting. And like an ayahuasca ceremony, we purge in different ways. And literally it was like demons coming out and it was horrific. I can't, like the energy of that was just insane. But after that, my knee was incredibly better. And just that experience, like here's another experience of like something that's really out there and bizarre. But why is my knee working better? Is it just the faith of the placebo? Who cares? It's working and it's working better. I wonder why faith is so poo-poo. This is like a really interesting question, an interesting thing to ponder, I think, I remember hearing Buddhists say like faith is the first step, to where we're going. I don't know, but yeah.
So how do you still teach yoga, or is that something you're interested in?
I haven't done it for, like I used to, like I said, at the temple was kind of my last tenure there. But what excited me more was I did some of the yoga classes, but the lecturing. So, here's an hour, do whatever you want at the temple. They were great because they give us that time. So it was more teaching about energy, teaching about, just ways to expand your mind, So now do I teach asana classes? Not really. But by the end, when I was teaching a more slowed down, like let's do 4 positions for an hour and a half, and started running energy and making it, at the time, I would say like a more shamanic practice, because with the energy work, there was an awareness of, like I would say, the mandala that gets created when all the energies of one person or the people come together in a room. So if you were to imagine like a being with 10 people in the room, they create an energetic signature that looks a certain way. Maybe the solar plexus chakra of this collective being is quite congested. So there's probably a few people in the room that have like emotional stuff going on or whatever. And when I sit down to teach, I could sense that. oh, okay, there's a lot of stagnation in the solar plexus here. How do we move through this? So I would teach in a way that, okay, I'm going to take 4 postures and really focus on clearing that. And people come out at their end, they're like, oh my God, I feel so much better. I don't know why. It's like you were doing it for me. And it's like, no, we're just, that part of me, the pranic part, is awake and it's extended and it can sense what's happening in the room beyond me. So it's just more information. It's not like I'm super magical or something. I've just been trained to be able to sense what your energy signature and your solar plexus is like in you, and from a distance, just tuning into it. And it's not super magical. It's just practice. You know, I practiced how to do it for now 16 years. It's just a sense. And it's one that's kind of fallen dormant in our culture. But like Master said in Pranic Healing, like everyone can awaken it with practice it if they desire. And so that made me a much better yoga teacher. And I did quite well in the classes, but I feel once I started getting into the medicine work, that's where things really started to hit the road. And I kind of left that go and focused solely on starting to diet, to apprentice, and then starting to sing and work together with Felix. Yeah.
I mean, again, I think that's something that a lot of people, if they really think about, they would really relate to. I mean, I think we all, if we're around someone we may sense something about them, a certain depression, a sadness, a dis-ease. Sometimes the way we express ourselves, it could be to cover up something, and I think a lot of people, they're maybe they haven't been trained, or they don't really see that. I mean, I remember thinking, even as a kid, because some of this can sound very woo-woo, but I remember as a kid, just really like, I would be introduced to someone and I would be like, that person is kind of shady.
Or you just don't feel good in their presence, or there's just something that's, you're just like, or maybe you feel they're sad, and as children, we have these senses, but we kind of, oh, well, that's not real. And,
But I remember thinking, like I would have that feeling, and then something would happen, and maybe an adult would be like, I can't believe that person did that. I never saw that coming. And I was like, it was so obvious. How did you not see that?
Well, that's what was cool about meeting my first teacher was like I said, the first, 27 years of my life, like no one was speaking that lingo at all. But I was just super sensitive. Like I'd go out, and I'm super sensitive. It's like many people are super sensitive. They call it empaths now or whatever, but it's like, it's that exact thing. And for the first time when I met my teacher, she's like, oh, this is what's happening. Their auric field is this. And she had like a whole language for everything I was sensing. And it finally actually made sense. It gave me some agency over being able to say, oh yeah, I can feel like when I sense I'm feeling bad, when I scan my solar plexus, I can feel there's a lot of like, literally it feels like sticky electricity right here in front of me. Okay, when I go through and to kind of sweep that away and move it, I feel a bit lighter. Oh, interesting. Okay, it's an experiment. And that's what I liked about that school is they said, don't listen to me, go home and experiment and try it for yourself. That's a great principle for anything. And that's what I would say to anyone with any of this stuff. It's like, just try it and see what happens. Does it work for you? Great. If not, toss it. It doesn't matter. It's not your path. Who cares? But for the people who I do feel now, because going back to what I said about, 15 years ago when people starting to learn, they had a hard time sensing. Now when I'm teaching people, I'm noticing that they're actually a lot more sensitive and being able to feel energy a lot more easily in the beginning. And I'm like, is it because we're all a little bit more conscious about energy? People are talking about it more. It's more in the collective. I don't know. But so now maybe at this time, it's a time when people are more ready to talk about stuff like that, to learn a little bit more about, okay, how do I navigate when I feel like someone I work with is really, really grumpy, really, really negative? How do I engage with that person so that my day is better? Okay, well, maybe doing prayers of sending them love and kindness every day for a month to see what happens. Oh, wow, I'm the only person in the office they're actually nice to now. It's an experiment, but one worth trying, but there has to be that impetus to try.
Well, that's a huge thing too, right? Because, we'll probably get into this more later, but for me, a large part of this work is so many of the things we consider our problems we often may recognize that, but it's much easier to point the finger and say, for example, the office, like, I'm not happy because this guy is always angry at me.
The projection game, yeah.
Right. But essentially, we're powerless then. So, what do you think is that balance of, obviously, in that office example, like, I think that's a really good example. Like, we can say, okay, like, I'm feeling that, that's real. But how does someone not fall in the trap of then, maybe in this language, like taking on that energy, or not becoming involved in that game of, well, you're angry to me, therefore I'm going to be a mean person, and then I give off being a mean person, and that just feeds that, and it creates this cycle.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to me is, where's your power in that? Are you a victim of the circumstance, or are you empowered in that situation? And I think being in the place of feeling empowered to do something, that's what I liked. I felt like the energy work gave. It's like, okay, well, before I had that awareness, I'm in the office as the example, and this guy is really bothering me, whatever. There's nothing much I can do. But now, learning about energy work, or learning about forgiveness, or learning about some of these principles, it's like, okay, well, now I'm empowered because I know this person's suffering, and that sucks. But I'm in a state now where I can say, yeah, that person's suffering. Like, is there something I can do to make their day better? It's a different shift. It's like a more empowered perspective, And in that, it's like, okay, I envision it like any conflict between two people. Like, you could see that there's a cloud of energy between them. Like, I see this like steel wool between them. And if I don't put something good into that steel wool pile, it's just going to persist there forever. And I don't want that. So what does it hurt me to say, okay, well, maybe before bed, I'll just send some good energy to that person. And the way Master Choi used to describe it, he said, like, when we have a bad thought about somebody, you could imagine that there's we'll call it a ball from our energy field that goes to that person and hits them. And their energy field shrinks. They have less energy. They feel worse. And yeah, when someone's having bad thoughts about you, maybe you get a sense when there's someone in a room kind of giving you a dirty look, and you can feel like contracted and like, that doesn't feel good. I feel like that person's thinking bad thoughts about me. Or you just feel something, like, or when you're a kid, you see a bunch of teenagers go by and they kind of look and laugh at you, and you're like, oh, I'm not cool, It's that feeling. And so that, he said that our energy fields actually have an automatic response, an unconscious response, that once we feel that, it sends something back to the person. So now I receive this thing back from that person and I shrink. And once you have that understanding, that deep, deep understanding, it's like, I can't make that choice anymore because we're both going to suffer. And it's just an idea. It doesn't matter if it's real or not. It's an idea, and it's an idea that's guiding my behavior. Okay, well, what if when I have a good thought about that person, a bubble goes out and empowers their energy field? And by response, they send one back to me and empowers me. Wow. Okay, I'm going to try that. So I've done that over several times in my life in conflict with people. And every single time you get that email that you didn't think that person would ever forgive you. You didn't think that person would ever talk to you again. Oh my God, I've been thinking about you in meditation, and you just keep coming up, and I'm really sorry for the way that I said these things, or whatever it is, because I'm empowered to be able to do that. But yeah, you have to be in a place where you're not swimming in your emotions, swimming in your reaction. And that's the hard part, is when we have our traumas and our things that come up, it's like we have to allow for that to come up, to express our anger, our fear, or whatever it is. But we can't stay stuck in it. And this has been a conversation I heard you and Felix talk about. And sometimes the best way when you're in the midst of it is just say, hey, I need to take an hour to go and clear my head, to get a little calmer so that I can be with you in a place of presence, and maybe do my meditation there. And now it's amazing because in that office example, it's like there's such an empowerment in that. I don't feel like a victim of circumstance anymore. It's just like, yeah, how can I alleviate this person's suffering? Not like I'm, I don't know.
That's a really good point, though. I think that's something, certainly I've experienced that in my life, which is if someone is mean or kind of nasty, or obviously we can feel those things, but I think the initial response is we take that very personally. And I think you said it really well, this idea of the only reason someone is being that way is because they're suffering. And I think just that recognition really shifts the dynamic. It doesn't become so personal then.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, the only reason someone is mean or nasty or degrading or, any of these things, it's because they're suffering. Like there's something in them they're not happy. But if we fight that, then we actually just feed that fire. And it's not to say we need to be like a punching bag and just take it, it may be walking away, like you said.
We can get angry. We're allowed.
Yeah.
Definitely. But I think the other piece of that is recognizing, as you said at the beginning, like your own projections and all of that, because we're still human and nobody's a Buddha and I'm not nice all the time. I still have my moments when I get triggered. But really doing that work to say, hey, where in this situation am I being triggered? Where was the first time I felt like this? All those sorts of things. And there's a beautiful practice of, and this is an important thing, I think, that's been coming lately, is this idea of, feeding your demons. We've got this demon of this jealousy or whatever it is, and it's like, I'm going to get rid of this demon. I'm going to slay it. I'm going to get rid of it. Or like, hey, do I bring it home and say, okay, you're here. Like, what is it you need for food? I think it's a Tibetan Cha practice where you turn yourself into food and you actually start to feed this demon and watch it transform in front of you, and make peace with these pieces of yourself. But until we get those moments of trigger, like we don't get that opportunity, to really sit with like, where am I triggered here? Where can I self-reflect? That's why things like astrology are great. When you've got transits or oppositions, it shows you, hey, projection is coming right now. Wake up, notice, but not everybody has that awareness, but we can have it all the time. I mean, it's important.
Seems like those lessons would go a ways in today's very divisive political climate.
Oh my goodness. Our binary world. Yeah.
So you came to the Amazon, to the Temple of the Way of Light, and you were teaching yoga. So obviously you had an interest in plant medicine. So what was that interest? What was that something you had worked with before? What really drew you to actually come down to the Amazon and work with ayahuasca?
In 2004, I was on a train in Germany and I bought Sting's book to read with me. And for those of you who haven't read it, his autobiography, the very first chapter opens with his journey about ayahuasca. And I read it and I said, what is this? Thank God for people like Sting putting himself out there in such an early time in 2004, because back then medicine wasn't very well known. So I was super grateful. And it wasn't until 2005 that I met my first, my only husband. I've been married once, Todd, who also worked at the Temple of the Way of Light, and he was talking about ayahuasca. And I'm like, oh my God, have you done ayahuasca? He said, yeah. And I was hooked. And it wasn't until 2008, he had talked about it, but the opportunity for ceremony still hadn't come. And I was getting frustrated. I'm like, I really want to do this. I've got everything going on with Pranic Healing, and this is great, but I still know there's another side of me that wants to unlock. And this is a funny story, faith. But at the time, I remember just lying down on the earth. I'm like, I'm going to try this. And so I laid down on the earth with my belly on the ground, super hippie at the time. And I said, okay, ayahuasca, if you can hear me, I am calling now. Like, I'm ready. Please find me somehow. The very next day, I get an email. Like, I kid you not. Hey, Safa, we're going to be doing ceremonies on Cortez Island. Would you like to come? The next day. So she's a spirit. She's listening, and I still believe that to this day. So in 2008, went and did my first round of ceremonies, blew my head off. What the hell is this? And I was hooked. And so I started working with a teacher up there for the next, I think, till 2012, till I basically left Canada pretty much permanently. I did maybe about, I don't even know how many ceremonies up there. We actually got to a point where we started hosting ceremonies. So that was my first taste of assisting ceremony, facilitating. I didn't know anything back then, but I did my best. And then from there, I knew I'd heard about dieting and really wanted to get to Peru to diet. But I had so much going on in India at the time, like that was really my focus. So I said, okay, that's on the back burner. I will get there. And I think it was in India. I had an Akashic Records reading, which I wasn't really know if I believe in it or not. But the person was just like, you need to go to Peru. Don't worry about the money. Just whatever you need to do, go to Peru. Because when she opened a channel, she started singing a Spanish song about flowers, and she was Italian. She goes, I don't know why I'm singing this. And I'm like, okay. So yeah, then the rest is history. I went to do my first dieta in 2014, and then got the job at the temple. And then, yeah, that's when things really started to open, when I started work with the Shipibo. Because in Canada, my maestro originally was working mestizo tradition, and then he started training in Shipibo. He was a Chilean guy. And when he would sing the Shipibo Icaros, I was like, what is the difference? It literally, like, the medicine would come alive inside my body. Not that the mestizo Icaros weren't beautiful, but for me personally, because I think Shipibo was supposed to be part of the journey, those particular Icaros and the sounds felt like razor blades just cutting me open. I'm like, whatever that is, I would like to know more about that. And so when I went to the temple and sat in my first ceremony with 5 healers all at once, I'm sure you remember your first time, it kind of blows your head off. Here I am in the heart of it, and I don't know a thing.
So what was that process like of beginning to work with it? And I mean, because obviously that's a nice thing about being there is you're surrounded by it, you're immersed in it, you can work with that medicine a lot.
Yeah, and see a bunch of different healers and how they work. Not just in the daytime, but in not in the nighttime, but in the daytime as well. I think it was, for me, the biggest part was watching the dismantling of a lot of the woo-woo, non-dual community, sidestepping kind of things that I was involved in while I was traveling in India and going to the satsangs and just seeing, like, you know, a lot of, it felt really ungrounded for me. Not everyone, but just in a sense of seeing someone project a particular persona, but then seeing, like, their life and how they're acting and behaving like they're just not lining. And I'm like, okay, there's a disconnect here. Like, how can we get a little more down to earth, a little more boots on the ground? Because this is feeling really like it's a great idea, but I'm not seeing it translate for people. So when I started to drink a lot of medicine and work with the different healers, it was like, oh, that idea is not helping you. Oh, that's a false belief. Like, oh, there is a duality. Yeah, you have a body. Yes, you can get hurt. Yes, there are things like spirits that have consciousness and are able to manipulate the world. It was like all that paradigm of the East had to stand up against reality. And it was hard. Okay, no, we're all one. I do not need to protect myself. All these sorts of ideas. And then you watch, okay, well, actually there is something when I'm dreaming. There's something sucking on the palms of my hand. I'm feeling really sick. What's happening? Like, you start to see things in ceremony and watch the healers work. And you're like, there's a whole other paradigm being opened here that I can't ignore and keep poo-pooing with these ideas. Okay, I'm going to open my mind and start to ask questions about what's happening around me. And I got super interested because now I have to try to integrate these two paradigms. How do they go together, you know? And this has been the journey, and I'm still on the journey. Are spirits real? Is it just your psychology, you know? I think, you know, if you think about the Western magical tradition, I mean, everything got very psychological in the early part of the century. It's not you, it's just a projection of your mind. There's no things as spirits or demons or gods. It's just all you, you know? And I think this way of thinking pervade for a long time. And I feel like from what I'm seeing, people are starting to come out of that again and start to, yes, there are spirits that we can conjure. And if we keep doing it in the same way, with the same technique and the same 5 steps, we seem to get the same energy arising. Oh, okay, there's something to this, you know? Or sitting in ceremony, and if I don't have dietas or I don't have protection, this is my experience. But then once I start to, if I put this tobacco protection around me, and I use these flower water, there seems to be a different experience, you know? There's something happening here. You know?
What was that experience like as you began to work with other people? Were there common things that you saw people were coming from or coming to heal or to understand? were kind of their patterns you began to see, and I mean, not only why people were coming, but potentially how this medicine was working, and what was going on, and what they were emerging out of that with, kind of the change that happened?
I think, I mean, a lot of different reasons people come, for sure. I mean, the Western life maladies of depression and lack of direction and leaving jobs, not wanting to be in jobs, relationships, all these sorts of things, just a sense of looking for more meaning, I think, ultimately, and happiness, just keeping it simple, am I making a difference? Am I happy? And this work, the Shipibo work, is very similar to what I do with the energy work. It's like, sit down, look at what's going on. Oh, that looks dirty, and then I clean it. And that's kind of what we're hired to do. Now, in the Shipibo world, things look a little bit different than maybe they feel in the energetic world of pranic healing or energy work. Consistently, energies that maybe when you sit down and start to open that don't feel good, maybe will look like spiders, maybe will look like insects, maybe will look like clowns, very consistently clowns. Cobwebs that literally feel like they're falling down from the sky on you. Looking towards a person and not being able to see them because all you see is black. There's very consistent ways that it starts to show up on a person, bad energy, bad thoughts, trauma. And the more that you do the work over the years, you start to see these consistent signatures. Like a trauma looks like this, sadness looks like this, a spirit that's attached to someone looks like that. And in the beginning, it's very disconcerting because you start to see like, oh my God, I'm covered in spiders, or like, and it's very, the work is the patience to get yourself to a place where you're not reacting in fear, or you're just like, oh yeah, there's another spider. Oh yeah, there's another centipede. Okay. And just pick it off and clean it, and this is the work. Now, the interesting piece, and this is where I think this is an open discussion, and it's like, I think of that myth of Hydra, where you continually cut the head off the demon, and then there's two more, and there's two more, and there's two more, and getting to the point, okay, well, yeah, let's cauterize the head so more can't spring, but there's one that's immortal. And okay, I'll cut the mortal neck off, and then I'll bury the immortal head, but it's always there, waiting to spring up. And I think this is the issue with people coming to drink ayahuasca. They come and they have an amazing workshop, and then they feel great, and they go home, and for 6 months things are great, and then start to feel bad again. And I feel like that's Hydra's head under the rock. It's the part that is that like immortal part that, okay, yeah, we clean, but that's the part that the person themselves has to uncover. And as I said before, feed the demon. Like I don't think that's something that another healer can fix for you, And that's where I think, branching into dieta, I think that's where you start to hit your own hydras. Is where you start to be like, okay, yeah, now I'm on my own. Yeah, there's a maestro there, but if he's good, he's going to he's going to be like a ghost and say, hey, it's between you and the plants. I'll be there if you freak out, but really, it has nothing to do with me. So what's under the dirt there? And that's what diets uncover.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So after a period of time of working, teaching, working with ayahuasca, then you was that kind of just a natural transition? I mean, you said you originally came down because you were interested in diet. So yeah. Was there a moment where you were just kind of like, okay, I need to do this? Yeah,
I think, well, as you know, I met Felix, and he was on this podcast, and he's very much, it was like amazing to meet a person who was like really solid about their path. And I'm like, that's rare. You really know what you want to do. And he turned to me, and I'd only been in the temple for maybe 3 months. And he said, what do you think about going to diet with my teacher for a month? And my whole body became super electric. And I call it, following the golden thread. It's like those moments where like your whole body's reacting on a level. I joke maybe it's your past selves or your future selves calling you forward, but something makes you electric, and you're like, yeah, that. I'll cancel all my other jobs. Let's go. So when I got to the jungle for my first time to Sui's village, and, back then there was no one else dieting. It was just us alone in a forest that wasn't even cleared, under a half-built tombo, just with a net. I was hooked because it was freaking hard. And it wasn't necessarily the I mean, yeah, the ceremonies, they were difficult in the beginning, but the biggest part was like being out there and being bit by mosquitoes every day and starving and having to sit with Felix, because we chose to diet together, and it's a very different path choosing to diet with your partner versus dieting solo. Our teacher Sui talks about it as aligning your kanos, or your central energy channels, like you're literally weaving them together, and you start to become so enmeshed that it actually becomes difficult, I think, to unmesh yourselves. And it's one particular way. So when you're out there, like we would literally sit, end to end, mat to mat, with a big mosquito net for months and months and months, just staring at each other and going through all our hydras. And there was no escape. It's like, I feel like the worst person in the world right now, and how could you love me? And I am just worth nothing. You know, those moments you go through on diet. And literally all I could do was turn around, do a 180-degree turn and just look the other direction. And Felix is like kind of there. And we had to go through that over and over and over again and keep showing up for each other. Like, hey, this is your darkest fears. This is your worst paranoias. This is your this and that. Wow, but I'm still here, And it's the most amazing experience to go through with another human being. Amazing. So continuing going out there and dieting with Sui, like he, as Felix says, like he kind of disappears. You think the Western model of like, I've paid my money, now you're going to dispense the wisdom, and it's so not like that, which I'm so grateful for. He talked about his grandfather, and he said, I'd have such hard times, and I'd go up to my grandfather and complain and get really angry, and grandfather would just say, well, if you don't like it, get a job in Lima. Oh, okay, well, tread back and go sit in the tambo, And Sui's very much like that. And it's an interesting point because, I'm a woman and I have a male teacher. And okay, yes, these are gender things, but gender's, male, women, it's very thing down here in the jungle. That's their culture. It's, the roles are very defined. And so it's much more difficult for women to become healers in this tradition than it is for men. They don't get the same support from what I've seen. Like I have some maesters told me they had to hide and go run away with their uncle and didn't tell their parents so that they could train, And I found it really interesting because even going out there, one, we're not Shipibo. And even though Sui has treated us like intense family and he's been so amazing, there's still that line and I respect that this is the wisdom for my family and my lineage, and I'm going to pass these very deep secrets down to my Shipibo family. And I respect that. And I respect that we have to go out there year after year after year after year for him to start actually teaching us. Okay, you're here now again and again and again. Yeah, I'm going to start to give you some tidbits, a little thing here and there, some of the secret words or some of the ways to do things. And if you're Shipibo, you get that for sure. If you're a man, I feel that you get that even more, or a little bit more. But as a woman, there's less inclination, I find, just maybe because my teacher knows how to teach men. That's not his fault. He's not a woman. And the way this medicine world works, I really see that the maestros work in a very different way than the men. Mm-hmm. And Sui often talks that men were very hard-headed. We have to jump into the fire, and we have to do it like in a difficult way to actually crack ourselves open. He said, women, they're already open. They're connected to the earth. When they diet, it opens more for them. And maybe that's why he leaves me alone. I don't know. But, my last diet, there was so much going on. We were managing 10 dieters at the time, which I'll probably will never do again. That many people at once. But he had scolded me for something that I, at the time didn't feel was my fault. Like there was a miscommunication, and it got a bit misogynistic, but in their culture, it's normal. But coming from a Western culture, it's like, oh, I take that personally. I'm a woman. How could you say these things, And went back to my tambo, and I remember feeling like I'm never going to learn because I'm a woman. He's just never going to teach me. And he's been teaching me the whole time. So I just want to clarify that. But at the time, this is my lesson. And for about 2.5 days, I never left my tambo. Like I didn't get out to call everyone to eat. I just let Felix do everything. And I couldn't get up. I was just so devastated. And on the I guess the second day or third day, whatever it was, it's like I felt this whisper come in. And it was like, that this is between me and you. doesn't have anything to do with anyone else. And it was a plant. You're going to learn. So don't worry. And in that moment, like when we were talking about breaking free of your perceptions, and it's like, my perception was that like, I'm only going to learn if Sui gives me the secrets, you know? And once that perception broke, that once I open myself fully to the plants and trust and have faith that they will teach me, I felt so free. It was incredible, you know? And I think those are some of the things we have to go through, like being a woman in a culture like that. It's coming from the West, it's very different. But like when you can kind of set the ideas of how things are supposed to be, and this is the whole path of dieting. You know, I joke that it's like you barge through laying this cement road. It has to be this way and it has to look like this. And I have to get from A to B. And the plants have a different idea. They spring up as cracks in the pavement so that your car can't get through, or your bike falls over, or your skateboard, you know, like you can't get to B, because all the plants are reaching up in the way and saying, hey, stop. Hey, look, it's not this way. Look over here. B doesn't matter. And so it disintegrates your Bs. And it's all about the journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a lot there. But I think that's a really interesting thing. I think the world often very much acts like a pendulum, and it, you know, it's constantly back and forth. And obviously, as you were saying, kind of in this more Western way, you know, certainly women were disadvantaged in some areas, and that natural reaction is that pendulum starts to swing and bring it back into balance.
All this rage has to come out.
Yeah. But then obviously it can go too far in the sense that I think some of us, we forget, or maybe we just overlook that men and women are different. And it's such a simple statement that any child can recognize, and yet with all of this kind of knowledge and beliefs we've gotten away from. And I think it's really, you know, it's beautifully embodied in one of the stories of ayahuasca, because ayahuasca is two plants. Mm-hmm. There's the ayahuasca vine and there's the chacruna plant. And the Shipibo would say the vine came from the body of man, and the chacruna, or the kawa, came from the body of woman. Mm-hmm. And I think what's so beautiful about that story is neither one works without the other. There's a symbiotic relationship. They would say, you know, actually it's the kawa, the chacruna, that gives the light, that gives the vision. Mm-hmm. But it can't work without the ayahuasca. The ayahuasca is that which gives the effect. It's that which creates the space. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really beautiful, because from my experience, that's actually some of these gender roles that often the men are potentially the space holders, that which allows the medicine to open. Even in ceremony, it's often the men singing to the medicine, opening it up. And then the women, you know, as you were saying, Sui said, they're already open. They have a sensitivity. There's a light, mm-hmm. and that it's kind of going in and doing the cleansing and the opening and the connecting. And but it's interesting, because I think a lot of us don't like to hear that.
Well, especially now, it almost feels like, because gender is becoming so fluid, it's like almost like we're not awake if we you know, stick to these ideas of the masculine feminine principle. And it's a principle that I'm speaking of, you know, the yin and the yang ultimately. And a human can embody either of those. But even as Felix and I work together, I don't work like him. I don't want to work like him. He drinks a lot more medicine than I do, and I call him like the bull in a china shop. He'll just sing and sing and sing and sing and sing and like just bulldoze his way through something. And I feel like he's the one that opens the space and really holds it and protects it, so that I can come in and start investigating and starting looking and getting into the cracks and using my fluid energy, you know, to see things. And then I tell him, hey, this thing is here. Oh, this thing. Oh, okay, yeah. And he's always there to get me out of the jams mm-hmm. that I get into sometimes because of being so open, you know? So that's why I love working in a team. And I mean, I watch the Meisters at the center. They're the same. Every center I've worked at, you know, sometimes one of them gets in a jam and the other one, okay, yeah, no problem, I'll sing to you. You know, the guests don't know because they're so in their own thing, they don't know, but sometimes the healers have to help each other. hey, can you sing to me? Because right now I'm getting hit pretty hard. And so that's what we do for each other, to keep the ceremony running. And yeah, I'm grateful to have that teamwork. And I think that's why we work so well together. And I watch other husband and wife maestro teams, and I think it's the same for them, It's a different way of working, but it's nice to have someone always have your back. And to be fair, I probably wouldn't have started this path as early as I did without knowing Felix was there for me. I mean, for the first probably year, I really watched him sing and sang in the background. I would get involved a little once in a while, and I got hit pretty hard. One time ended up in the hospital. And so there was this for a while, like, no, I'm just helping. Oh, no, I'm just assisting. Oh, no. And it's like a limbo place to be, but it's an important place to be humble and to say, hey, yeah, like I still have lots to learn. Fortunately, having all the years of the energy work, really, really helped a lot. Like, I can't imagine stepping in now and doing what I do without that knowledge, to be fair. Even if it was interesting at the temple before I started working with Sui, he actually was in a tombo with me once, and I was working on somebody, and he just was watching me, and I could see him just like intently watching. And he looks over and he goes, oh, you're a maestra. So he didn't really know what energy work at the time, but he could see that, yeah, just like he does, he's sensing the energy and moving it, manipulating it for them. That's their word. You know what you're doing. You can move energy and clean and heal. And that was really interesting for me, that he was able to see exactly what I was doing. And bless Sui, because he was able to, when I went to the jungle, really foster that, because their family has knowledge of so many different plants. And he said, oh yeah, well, this particular concoction of diet will help open your hands to be sensitive. Like, one really cool story, just to give people an idea of what the Shipibo know, there's a particular bath that you do, vapor bath for your hands. And one of the maestras, she said to me, well, you're going to do these baths, and then you're going to have a dream in the next week that your hands are being crushed. And that's when the medicine's entering your hands. And I said, how do you know that? Well, sure enough, within the week, I have a dream that these two big hamster gerbil things, I'm like, oh, so cute. And I picked them up, which was the medicine in the dream, and they clamped onto my hands and they wouldn't get off. And I'm trying to fling them off, and I can literally feel like my hands are crushing. And I woke up and I'm like, how do they know that? People are amazing. And then it was like that from then on. He kept giving me diets that basically helped my hands to become more sensitive. So now when I think about like what it is I do, it's not just pranic healing, that there's so much more going on, because the plants are flowing through the hands now. So sometimes when I sit in front of somebody, there's sometimes the plants will come through so strong into my hands. And it was interesting when I first started singing, because I feel very strongly about holding to tradition and honoring the tradition. It was like, I can't use my hands in ceremony, can't do energy work because I need to sing Ikaro. I was like, this is how you do it. And it was actually Sui that was like, that's your medicine, do it. That's why I'm helping you to open your hands. And once I went to ceremony and started like, yeah, that is my medicine, that's what I'm really good at, and started to work that with the Ikaros, like everything just opened. And that's when I could say, oh yeah, I'm done saying that I'm just training, I'm just this and that. It's like, no, like you actually have to make a declaration. Because I was afraid. That's it. I was terrified that I wouldn't be able to do it. Or I think one of the biggest things of this path is like with psychedelics, there's a fear always that you're going to pop off and you never know when it's coming. And that fear of having to have people in your house that you're there as the guardian of for an evening, take that very, very seriously. I know Felix does as well. And it's like, okay, like, yeah, there could be a time when something happens to me in that space, and will I be able to handle it? And so there's always this fear that I have to face. Even now, every time I sit down to drink medicine and have people in the room, it's always there. You feel the anxiety of the people coming. And it's like, if I don't face that every time, I'm not going to do it, But there was so much anxiety about it. But I remember sitting one day, and I thought, oh, people who call themselves, that are white, call them maestras or this or unanya. Oh, that's so egoic, And And it was actually the Shipibo that were like, no, you got to be egoic. You got to say, I'm awesome. Like you actually have to be able to talk like that so that you can push off the fear, push off the doubt. And like, so it doesn't have an anchor. So they're actually teaching me to be like almost, egoic in a sense, not where I think I'm great, but in a sense where like, yeah, I got this. I'm going to do this. And every time the fear comes in, you're like, nope. You're not very good. You can't do this. Shut up. And you just literally have to push the doubt. And like, once you like that, there's a strength that comes. You learn how to dominate your mind. And I remember one night before we were about to sit, it was like, enough. Are you a maestro or not? Like, what are you doing? And I was like, why don't I just say it? Okay, yeah, I'm a maestro. I'll just say it. And then all of a sudden it was like, boom. And something opened, because Sui had given us permission. He's like, yeah, you're ready to do this. The maestros have been really supportive. The one that I worked with for a long time, Orphalinda, like when you have their support and they're encouraging you, because there's so much, I came from North America, but there's so much history between different cultures and appropriation and all these sorts of things and not honoring of different cultures. And so there's so much fear of like, am I going to hurt you in some way by doing this, But to have the encouragement of our teacher, of the people in the community, like, hey, no, like, go out and do this. Please go do this. Please keep this tradition alive because our children don't want to learn anymore. Hopefully, maybe that inspires their children to say, hey, dad's making a living from this. Maybe I want to do this. And keep the people in the community. When you go to the community and you walk around and you see like, 2/3 of the people not even there because the men have to go off and work in Pucallpa or work in Lima to make money. And the women are just sitting there around like, and the only way they can make money is to do the border work, the sewing. It's sad. It's like, how can we support them so that they can be in their communities more? Okay. Yeah. Like, that's why Sui was so excited and we can bring people to the community to diet because now we get to hire all these different people to build things and to like bring food and go to Pucallpa and do these things and buy land. And it's exciting, but I feel there has to be that give back, It's super important for me. And that's why I feel, at least for myself, I feel you have to be balanced in yourself that like, there's a balance. I'm a double Libra, so I couldn't exist if it felt like it was just a take relationship, How can we give back to Sui in their community and these sorts of things, And sometimes that involves some funny things. You get asked for some funny things and you have to have boundaries. Like I can't just give everything I have, but at the same time, it's like where you can give and when you can give. Yeah, 100%. For sure. You've given me so much,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You mentioned that word balance, and I was thinking about it in a few things. One, we started talking about gender and obviously these polarities, and obviously everyone has both of those polarities within them. But as we were talking, maybe there's archetypically for men, there's certain qualities they have. Archetypically for women, there's certain qualities. As an individual, we have different qualities, much like the martial arts example I was giving. Some people may be really good at it, some people not so much. Also in this idea of, like these thoughts that come to us, like I'm not good enough, and then pushing that away and saying, no, I am. But then also the balance of maybe that feeding the ego, like, oh, I am this, and maybe now I'm this, and then I'm this. and is that also that coming from like a grounded place? Like, obviously there's a difference between I did all of this training and now I'm this, or just saying I drank ayahuasca once and now I'm this. And then also kind of this last idea you also mentioned about balance between, obviously you learn this tradition and wanting to honor that, but at the same time finding your own medicine and integrating it and creating something that's very uniquely you. Mm-hmm. Because we're not Shipibo. We're never going to be Shipibo. I don't want to be Shipibo. I love the Shipibo, yeah. The ones I know. Yeah. Not all of them, but a lot of them. But that's not me. It's not something I want to be. So how, all of these things with balance, like what do you think is the key to that, to always finding that balance? I know that's a big question.
Mm-hmm. I keep having this image. I posted this one on my Instagram a couple of days ago of these two pillars, the dark pillar and the light pillar, and then the scale in the middle. And it's like the pillar of spiritual aspiration and wanting to know God, and just all these good things, of wanting to awaken our spiritual aspiration, to become a spiritual being, enlightened being. And then this other pillar of our best human potential, where, I want to find love, and I want to have the power to be able to alter the universe in ways that are helpful. I want to be healthy. I want to have enough money to be able to donate to my friend's fundraiser when her house burns down. I want that for sure. I want to have money. And so for me, it's like being honest about that. Because I find there can be a lot of, I'm a good person. I don't want these things. I have endless energy. I don't know. Like, it's just this idea of the goodness is the best, or leaning towards the pillar of good all the time. And this projection of I'm a good person and I'm a loving person and I don't get angry and I don't, I would never hurt anyone and I never have bad thoughts. Not true. And I think the more like we can turn towards our shadow, I think, it's just shadow work. Like, are you doing your shadow work? When I think about a story a friend of mine told me, and she was like, she understood some Shipibo, and she was saying how she could understand that the Shipibo was singing to her to help pay for his dental work. And this sort of thing happens, I love the Shipibo 100%. I've had some amazing experience, but like you said, there's some that, hey, I don't really care about all this love and light stuff. Like, I just need my teeth fixed. I know how to do it. And so like, what if you're in that experience where you have the power to manipulate somebody's mind to give them your money, or something like this, because your teeth are falling out? What choice do you make? And I think this is where the rubber hits the road. And we're always refining this because we're not perfect. But at least admitting to myself, hey, this shadow part of me is here. I hear this niggling that wants to be like, oh, it'd be so nice to have healthy teeth. And maybe if I just do this, but at the same time knowing, like, understanding the law of karma. And this is where, like, I'm really appreciative of this teaching, because it's always kept me in a sense where, like, I'm not going to do that because I understand I'm going to have to suffer the consequences of this later. It keeps me in check. That keeps me in balance, that understanding of that teaching. But not everyone has that teaching. I don't know if, like, karma was a big teaching going around the Shipibo village 100 years ago. Like, I don't know, not that I've heard. They understand it now because there's been a lot of interaction with people from the West. But there's some healers that won't do that to you. But the beautiful part about the energy work that I love is it gives you the ability to scan if people are courting into you, which is interesting. So if you work with a particular healer and you get a niggling of like, something feels a little off. And then I scan my energy centers. Is there courting? Are they courting to my sex center? Some people use power for manipulation of sex. Are they courting to my agya, my third eye, my mind? Oh, they are. Oh, so there's a courting here. There's something about that person that felt they needed something from me. Sometimes I send the cords out. But to always check at the end of that interaction with somebody, is there an energetic link here that shouldn't be here? And so I always felt really safe being able to use pranic healing or the energy work to be able to scan. But a lot of people don't have that, where they go and they, with blind faith, go and work with a maestro. Ah, yay, he's so nice. He's singing these ikros to me. But don't really know what's happening. And this is, I think, the danger of going down to places like the jungle and dieting and all these sorts of things. We don't really know. Because it takes, I think, at least 7 years of watching someone to see who they really are. And that's why I work with Sui. He's human, for sure. I know the human sides of him, still love him, but he's never hurt me. He's never abused his power to get something from me. And I really appreciate that. And I hope to emulate that for the rest of my life with that example, you know? Yeah.
What would you say are some good qualities of a curandero, of a doctor? I mean, obviously that seems like a really fundamental one, not hurting someone. And also that idea of, I mean, I really like that idea that the shadow work, or because that's something that's always going to come up. It's never something that's finished. It's every thought, every action we take. It's trying to find that balance. Like, am I pushing too hard? Am I going too far? Am I, like, what is the true intention behind that? And can I see if I'm making a mistake? And then can I rectify that? Can I grow from that?
My first reaction, at least in the world of medicine work, is courageous, comes to mind. You have to be pretty fearless in that space. To be able to face things when you feel like you're overwhelmed, when you feel like you're losing your mind, when you feel waves of fear coming off of somebody and your whole body starts to go numb. Do you keep going? And do you know how to dominate your mind? And this is, I think, one of the most challenging and most beautiful parts of this work, that you don't really start to learn until you start to sing to people, I feel, anyway. Because your whole job is sitting in front of somebody and starting to sing to them. And it attacks you. It throws everything it's got at you, because these energies don't want to leave. And they're like, I don't want to leave. I'm going to just make your life super uncomfortable, and maybe you'll go away. And it's literally like that. And do you sit there and continue to sing, or to continue to sweep and to work and to stay focused and to not let yourself get distracted? You have to have intense focus. And I watch some of the, at least on diet in the jungle, when it's been just absolute chaos in the room. And I watch Sui, and he's just one pointed. He is singing and singing and singing. And I can see all kinds of spirits behind him trying to distract him, on his back, all over the place. And he doesn't move. And so maybe it's not even courage. Maybe it's just having a mind that's very balanced, that doesn't get thrown off. And it's that laser pinpoint focus are the people that actually are able to burn a hole, to burn something away. Because if our energies are distracted, it's like that idea of the light bulb where, 25 watts is, you can put your hand near it because all the rays are going in, the photons are going in different directions. But when they're all channeling in one direction, 25 watts or 60 watts can burn a hole in something. It's a laser. And so, like, how much of a laser is the doctor? And this is something that I'm continually working on with each diet. And I've actually learned so much from Felix. He's amazing at dominating his mind. It's very rare to meet somebody that's, I think, had that kind of training, where I've watched him lose his mind several times in the jungle, and get to the other side of it, but not give up. I think that's someone who can be effective. And I have so much respect, and I've gone through mine too, where he's watched me lose my mind. Yeah.
Do you have any other advice for people? Maybe if people haven't done this work before, even if they have, but they feel called to come and work again, what are good things that someone should look out for in a center, in a person, that might help them to not end up in a bad place?
Mm-hmm. I may be a little biased, and that's just from my experience. And, I know everyone's going to need a different thing. So for me, size is a big thing. After working so long in like a community style setting and then working one-on-one, there's so much to be gained from working in a community style setting where there's like 20 people in a room, because you learn so much from listening to one another and the camaraderie. And I've seen so many beautiful group shares, and I have so much love for that, but being on the other side now, singing to people, for me, it's like the more time I get to spend one-on-one with somebody, the more I get to learn about somebody and to know them and to have more time to sing to them. At least for me, I'm finding that I can be more effective. Maybe once I'm a super awesome, badass healer one day, like I see in the Shipibo, like some of the people I've seen at the temple, they can like just do it in 5 minutes. That's amazing, I'm not there yet. I'm very happy to say that. And sometimes when the rooms are a little bit smaller, there's a little bit less energy going on. So for people who have a lot of fear about, being afraid or, being sent off the deep end and having nobody there to help them, these sorts of things, it's a little bit easier to manage when, say, like, we generally have 4 people in the room. And it's easier to be able to, that person's coming up. I can feel them. I'm going to break this ego off, go across the room and just like sing this person down before they have to pop or have some experience where they re-traumatize their trauma, as we say. So we tend to work in a way that we try to keep people in the middle and never give them enough where they're having the pop off. And for some healers, they look at that pop off as super valuable. It's just where we're choosing to work. So I think looking at, size of group, how big do you want? Do you want the community vibe or do you want some more one-on-one work? Both are super valid. And then, the experience of the people holding the ceremony. Have they the training to be able to handle when things happen? An example I can think of is I've heard many, many, many stories of guests that have come down after a traumatic ceremony up in the north. And there's lots of people that I've met, they've done 8 ceremonies or 10 ceremonies or 16 ceremonies, and now they're going to serve medicine because you can buy it on the internet, and don't have the training to know what to do when a big spirit comes into the room and starts attacking somebody. And so the person goes crazy and has 4 hours of just being traumatized and screaming, and nobody really knows how to bring the person down. We see a lot of that. People mixing big trees in ayahuasca medicine and then serving them and not really understanding what they're doing. And then people get damaged. Do the people come from a tradition? Now, a lot of people will probably say to me, this is old way of thinking, and, I'm the maestro and the plants are going to teach me, and it's between me and the plants. And, to be fair, I'm not saying that there aren't people out there that could handle it, that they just have the innate skill and the innate knowledge and no one ever gets hurt in their ceremonies. But I think they're few and far between from what I'm seeing, people coming down and becoming hurt. So I would say, vet their experience. Do you know people that have been to work with these people? What was the experience like for them? And getting that feedback. How do they hold the space? Did anyone freak out and they weren't attended to, or did the person get taken care of? How much time have they spent? Like Felix, he spent, years working at the 2 years of working on Dora, where he didn't even take a break, where he worked with thousands and thousands of people, saw every kind of iteration of expression. Like, that's experience. I feel safe in that space with him. He's also jiu-jitsu. Like, he knows what to do as stuff goes down. That makes me feel safe. I emanate safety. Felix emanates safety, and the guests feel safe. It's a really nice thing, I also like, and this is kind of an interesting thing, but being in the male-female team, because there's so much fear of having, as a woman, being taken advantage of by a healer, So in a space where there's a husband-wife team, like all those dynamics, sure, there's some times when after ceremony I can see women being like, oh, Felix, and I'm just like, I just laugh because I'm like, he's always like, oh, my wife, I love her so much, my wife, and he's very clear with his boundaries. Yeah, and so I appreciate that, knowing there's a space where that healer's not going to cross sexual boundaries or leaky energy boundaries, That's also important, So I think those are most, just, are you going to be safe? So for me, those are my big things, Do they have the experience? Are their boundaries good? Yeah.
Yeah, we often use this analogy of open heart surgery, and obviously the set and setting is huge. If you're having your heart operated on, hopefully it's a space that can handle that, because that's a big thing. And with this work, obviously we're not physically doing open heart surgery, and yet this work is working physically. It's working mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and there's a lot that can be opened up in that space.
And I think that's an important point. is even though you set up the set and setting in the best way possible, this medicine can still crack you open in ways you didn't expect. And I think anytime you go into the jungle to drink ayahuasca, it's very important, first and foremost, this is a difficult one and people may get upset with me, but taking responsibility for whatever happens. And this just comes from experience, but it's like, okay, yeah, like my last dieta where for the first time ever, I got carried out of the Moluccas screaming for God. First time in 12 years. And I wanted to blame everyone, the fighting families, my maestro was too out of it to be able to help because we were getting attacked, all these things. Blame. And I know he was doing the best that he could, and Felix was doing the best that he could, but we were just being stretched to learn, all of us in that moment. And so if I come away from that experience blaming everything around me, I feel like I'm kind of missing the point. It's like I have to respect that this medicine is a spirit and I can't control everything. And this is the big piece, is that we have to learn to be comfortable with being out of control. Not comfortable, maybe, but understanding that it could happen. And if we choose to do this medicine, those times where we get taken to a point beyond control, we've ultimately signed up for it. And I'm not saying where if someone gets abused by a healer or something like that, like they asked for it. Not like that at all. It's not what I'm saying. But at the same time, it's like stepping into a culture where the rules are different. Especially, I'm talking more so about going to diet, but like more so that men may use their power to get women. I mean, this is just a more common thing there. They may use their icaros or their plant baths to seem more appealing. Like this is just really quite common there. And so I understand, like, okay, yeah, if I'm going to go delve into this work and into these working this way, these sort of things may happen to me. And if I can take responsibility, being in a place of power right from the beginning, I'm going to be stronger the whole way through the process. But sometimes I think like you have to go through the process of dieta to find your strength, to love the victim, but then to say, hey, this doesn't have to be the dominating force in my life anymore. There was one dieta, and it was 3 months, and we, paid our money, and food ran out, I think, the end of the second month. And we're like, we paid all this money to have food, but there's no food. Okay, well, we'll eat white rice for, the rest of the duration. And by then, you're already quite nutritionally depleted after 2 months of just eating lentils, rice, some plantains, the occasional fish, no salt, no sugar. And it was the very last 2 ceremonies, so the end of the 3rd month. And I remember the second last ceremony being so weak because I was so nutritionally depleted. I was just, and that's, of course, when the plants come in, right? When you think you're dying, and then that's when they hammer you. Are you really cut up for this work? And it literally looked like a black hole in my lap. And every ikoro that I sang, the light would come out of it and just get sucked into this black hole in my lap. And the black hole is like, haha, nothing you can give me will beat me. I'm much stronger than you. You're so weak. You're too old. You're a woman. You don't have enough fire. Every single thought I had about myself was amplified, And so that ceremony ended, and I got back to the tambo the next day, and one of the women shows up and she gives me a coton, which is one of the shirts the Shipibo women wear. You've earned this. This is for you. This is our gift to you. And I just started to cry. After they left, I was grateful, but I got back to my tambo and I'm just like, I'm such a fraud. I'm such a phony. I can't even do this work. Like I just couldn't even get up and sing last night. All the self-doubt. And I remember right before ceremony, I literally started to shake because I can't go through that again. And I picked up my pipe and I lit it and I sobbed an ikoro into the pipe. And then when I finished, all I heard was like, well, you got 2 options. Looking around like, where's this voice coming from? You can roll over and die, or you can get up and go to ceremony. I was like, oh, okay. That's the truth. Those are my options, always. And so I got up and I went to that ceremony and I finished the dieta. And that night was better.
I think it's a common thing. I mean, especially the more one does this work, often in the beginning, I think people are maybe expecting or chasing these ceremonies where it's union and connection and bliss and joy, and I see all these amazing things. And but I think eventually, if one continues, one begins to experience more and more difficult ceremonies. For a lot of people, it happens right off the bat. But and obviously, it was something I think I was also talking to Felix about. Is from my experience, the more one does this work, much like you were saying, actually the more difficult it can become. Or as some of these people would say, the more the medicine tests you, the tests become bigger and bigger. And much like you said, it's like, do you really want to do this work? Okay, well, I'm going to give you this. Ah, okay, you still want to do this work? Okay, I'm going to. So, but I think a lot of people will experience a ceremony that's just so challenging, so shaking. And I think a lot of people, they look at that as a bad ceremony, something that shouldn't have happened or that traumatized me, or as you said, the medicine was off or the maestro didn't do. Why do you think that's such an important ceremony when one does begin to lose their mind? Because I was talking to someone recently, but it's fascinating because so many people come to this work and they want to be enlightened, which is essentially losing your mind.
It is.
And, there's this joke that in India, if you say, oh, I've lost my mind, people start bowing down to you like, oh my God, he did it. But in most of the cultures we come from, if you say, I've lost my mind, people, they send you to the hospital. They send you to a psychiatrist. So I think we have this idea that we want enlightenment, we want to lose our mind. But if and when that actually happens, it's terrifying. It's as you said, it's one of these experiences where they have to carry you out screaming to God because we can't even comprehend that. I mean, it's one thing to talk about it; it's another thing to actually be in it. But so why do you think this medicine eventually is giving people that, and why is that important, or maybe it's not important?
The way they describe it, several Shipibo, is talking about going through school. The first couple diets are like kindergarten, grade 1, which, the first couple diets, you're like, this is kindergarten, but you keep going, because it gives you what you can handle. But it was funny because on the diet path, Felix had done a few more diets than I had when we started dieting together. So, it was ahead, but it was I was watching him do a few, some more difficult diets, and I was not quite there yet, doing the tree he was doing, and so he would say, eventually you have to go to high school and you have to go to university to graduate, the circle of Unanya. And I remember the first time I watched Felix go and watched him scream in the room, and he started screaming at me, and there was somebody transposed on top of me, and he was pointing at me and yelling at me, and I was like, oh my God, and so afraid. And the most selfish thing actually was oh my God, that could be me one day. I don't want to do that. That looks terrifying. But then watching him get through it to the other side of it, and watching the whole family around him singing him through that initiation was so beautiful. And afterwards, sitting around smoking our mapachos as we do, listening to Sui, congratulations, Sui Pino, you've passed your test, you've passed your prueba, you're at a otro nivel, yeah? and I knew that was coming for me. There's no real avoiding it. And this is a lot of the things the healers will say as in their community, people will work for a certain time, and then they hit one of those big ceremonies, too much for me. I don't want to keep going with that. I almost died, And so then when I had mine, and I was I'm sure there'll be more ahead of me, touch wood. The most important thing about that experience, you asked me, where's your faith? And what happened to me in the moment, it was like, if I could give a quick explanation, it was like 6 hours of feeling like my bones were being broken. Like someone repeatedly smashing me to the point where it felt like level 10 pain of smashing broken bones. And nobody helping me because there was so much going on in the Maloka that like Sui was fighting for his life. Felix was trying to help me, but he was very scared for me. Some of the other maestros were off in the jungle screaming at the families. Like it was chaos. And we were holding the diet for all these other dieters. So at the beginning, I'm like, Sui, please give me half a cup of what you're giving everyone else in case someone else goes off. I want to be here to help. It was my turn. And so, when the experience was happening, and I kept asking for help, and nobody was coming, and nobody was coming, and nobody was coming. Or they'd come and sing to me and be like, yeah, it's done. And I'd be like, no, it's not. Like I knew it wasn't. And then it would keep going, you know. And then there was a moment, and it was like, do you have faith? Because I could feel the freezing and the pain starting to come up to my heart. And there was like, oh, if that hits your heart, you're gone. You're going to die. And the pain got so bad that I finally just started screaming. Oh God, you know, and they pulled me out of the Maloka and laid me outside. And then finally it was like maybe 2 a.m. and then Sui could come and actually sit and sing to me. So I had Sui and 2 other maestros and Felix all singing to me at the same time. And I remember in that moment, I have 100% faith that Sui's going to do this. If I don't believe in Sui, this isn't going to happen. I have to believe in him, like the thumbprint in the stone. But I didn't know that story at the time. And I held on to that as the only thing that was going to get me through. And after like 40 minutes, I heard, we got it. And then I rolled over and just purged, of course, yeah. And so I think those experiences, when we're flailing through the most intense pain we've ever experienced, or the most intense mind losing we've ever experienced, do we just fall into the abyss, or do we reach for that pillar? The one pillar we can find, whether it's a mantra or it's the idea of God or the idea of ourselves, so we don't get lost. And I think we have to be tested in those moments where everything is so bad. Do you have that candle of hope inside of you? Is that alive inside of you? But you have to test yourself against those type of experiences to actually earn it, I feel. Yeah,
you mentioned this idea in the beginning of like, what does it take to be a good curandero? And you said courage and faith. And often many of the Shipibo I talk to, they say that this is a path of a warrior. And I think for many people that's very foreign, because they would view the path of a doctor, again, as something like, oh, I'm talking to spirits and angels and it's love and light and beauty. But in order
Sometimes
to get
it
that,
is.
right. But in order to embody that, one has to know the other side. One has to know the darkness. One has to experience the darkness to emerge out of that.
Because if you don't, where's the balance? Again, you're not. The more you can be in your center, the more power is in that place, because you're not like in yoga, you know, the whole point is stopping the sensations of the fluctuation of mind. Like, I'm pulled into the dark, I'm pulled into the light, I'm pulled into the shadow, I'm pulled into, you know, and it's just like, until we face all of those things more and more and more in big pendulum swings of super darkness, super light, it's still like, we still are trying to get back to that center point, but we have to be able to not be thrown by those big ones. So like, sometimes we have to step out onto that precipice and go through those tests. Okay, yeah, now I can be my center. I've faced that fear. That Hydra head has been faced. I know I'm okay now. And yeah, I died, but I'm still okay. Oh, okay. That thing doesn't rule me anymore. I'm not afraid of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a question I get a lot, because I would say, you know, the majority of the people, they emerge from this work and it's very clear, like they kind of see, okay, I was holding on to this and now this is better. And obviously I have work to do, but I think I have some idea of what I need to do. But some people, maybe if they have one of these kind of traumatic experiences, sometimes that can last for a long time and they can really hold on to that. But almost always from what I've seen is eventually someone emerges out of that and they look back in retrospect and they're like, oh, like, now all of these other things have emerged. Like maybe they get really creative and they start writing, or, they emerge onto some other path. They find kind of themselves, or they realize what's important and what's not important. So do you think that's where the idea of faith comes in, is even in these really difficult experiences, even maybe someone does this work and they go back home and maybe they're even struggling for a long time, but just constantly coming back to faith and trusting that something will emerge from this? Because I think that's also something interesting. Also, this idea of faith is, for me, it's like, why was this world created? Was it for darkness and evil and shitty things? That seems like a strange reason to create the world. Yeah. So for me also, faith is kind of trust that something greater is at work. And that experience is part of that, even if it's maybe very difficult.
I always joke that the light is always looking for you. It makes me think of a guest once who, like 7 ceremonies, and I felt for this person. Each ceremony was just horrific, and it was, I watched their faith kind of crumble. By ceremony 5, shouldn't it be better? By ceremony 6, shouldn't it be better? And I kept talking to her about faith. And the only reason that I had that faith was because I've seen so many people thousands of people go through workshop, and at the end there's something there at least for them. Maybe they don't get all the things they wanted for, but they got the thing they needed, And on the very last 7th ceremony, the most horrific night, that person had this experience of literally like the man with the light going through the darkness, like seeking to find them, And it's like, I do have faith that thing is always there. Like if we don't have that, we can fall into just incredible depression, incredible darkness, incredible sadness. And if you understand, like everything is a cycle, everything. And especially when you watch astrology, if you study that, everything is constantly moving, and we're high and we're at the top of the circle, and we're famous and everybody knows us and loves us and we're wonderful. And then, at some point people have their fall. Look at all the celebrities or, the gurus kind of thing, and then back up again, So I think like when we're in that pit of the shadow, just that knowledge, like just keep looking for it. Just keep looking for it. You have to put the energy in, But I think the more you go through those experiences of being through the dark and being beat up and being in the shadow, and getting out of it, you start to develop more and more faith, So if anything, I think encouraging people when they're in those moments, where do you find your faith? What inspires you? What people do you listen to that you call upon? Do you have a ritual to call on, an energy that helps to uplift you? Do you what is it you can do to help keep you going, But I think you got to keep putting your foot in the water and being skeptical, but at least being open. It's the first start, Yeah.
You mentioned this idea that in Europe there was kind of this split of where we started to say, oh, well, everything is just a manifestation of how I see the world. And obviously, like this plant work is very old. I don't think anyone knows exactly how old. There's different theories. But certainly, even just here in Peru, there's many different medicine traditions. And I think the more I look into it, because I've also always been really fascinated by religion and spirituality and things like yoga, Eastern practices. And something that ultimately drew me to this work was kind of seeing that in its essence, all of these traditions were pointing to the same thing. Do you think this is like a really specific work that's kind of just done here in the Amazon and it's never existed outside of that? Or do you think this also has roots in these other places as well? For example, often I think of like traditional Chinese medicine where they mapped out all of the meridians and all of these things. And the only way, I mean, the way that seems most likely that that happened is probably someone was under the influence of some plant medicine and they're like, oh yeah, I get it. And then they mapped it all out. And
Yeah, it initially opened the door. I mean, they talk about plants in the Yoga Sutras, so they've been around for a while anyway. I think, yeah, ultimately, a lot of these traditions point to the same truth. How they get there may be slightly different. But I think about like Tibetan Buddhism, how there is the cultivation of not just this light aspect body of us, but also this aspect of cultivating our fierce body. The one who can be ugly and be full of fangs and just terrorize and rip and shred everything apart and kill and maim. And that aspect is necessary to be able to fight against things and make change in the world. We have to be able to embody that fierce warrior. And I love that that's there. But to me, it feels balanced because I'm not just cultivating joy and goodness and light, but I'm also able to be a fierce warrior when I need to. And any kind of social justice, social change, like requires us to be able to be both fiercely. And not just like in that context, but also even the context of, say, being a facilitator for people going through this. Like sometimes when people are stuck in their loops, you need to be fierce and say, hey, I know anger is your thing and I'm probably going to poke this right now and you probably don't want to hear this and you'll probably yell at me, but I'm going to sit here fiercely because I care enough about you to be that mirror and be like, hey, this may be something that's happening and that, well, let's look at this, you know? And so I like that with the Shipibo tradition, there is that like the light and calling in the good and all these sorts of things, but there's also like stepping forward when you need to. I'm not sure if every tradition, as I've seen, really honors a place for the fierce, the humanness, as much as I'd like to see. And that's maybe where I'm feeling a bit of imbalance. That what if we were to still honor our human part of us a little bit more, acknowledge it a little bit more, incorporate it so that one day this fierce body and this joy body can come together and unite and take us places, you know? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So your center, Body Prana, how did that start? What goes on there? What are you guys offering?
Yeah. So Body of Prana, it's funny, the whole prana thing came from like doing the energy work, and now it should be, I want to call it bodies of everything. I don't know. So we work here in Peru. We've been working out of our home. So we've got a house with, you know, multiple bedrooms and have been having people come here and doing workshops. But right now, obviously with COVID, everything's been on hold. So we've been working in the community. But this is generally what we do, to have people come for, you know, 4 or 5 ceremonies and really do that like intense one-on-one work with people, which I love so much. And to get that experience of having a husband-wife team, having the Shipibo Ikaros, also having the experience of the energy work in the ceremonies. What's that like, you know? And the feedback that we get from people is like, it's really personalized. Like I really feel like you're doing this, looking at me, seeing my energy, really, really working to move things with me, you know? And then of course we can have talks with them the next morning in our own language and being able to say, hey, yeah, we saw this, but explaining the way we see things in a more Western friendly way, you know? Not telling someone like, oh yeah, you were covered in spiders or whatever, you know, like it's not helpful.
You have a demon inside you.
Yeah, right? Not helpful. But sometimes people hear that and then they get fixated on it, you know? So being really careful there. Also, too, I've been doing the energy work. I do a lot of work distantly online with people. So work with people around the world, and you don't have to have the person right in front of you when you're working on them. The more experience you get, you can basically have a picture of somebody and do a scan, and you write them, be, oh yeah, you've got like problems with your thoracic spine, T6 and T7 are having issues. Oh yeah, my back hurts there all the time. Like it becomes quite easy. That's something they also teach in Pranic Healing, that distance doesn't really mean anything, you know, but it's just practice kind of thing, and trusting yourself that you can actually do something like that, which is amazing, you know. So if people want to get in touch with us there, we're taking the month of October off because we are doing a dieta for 2 weeks and then we're going to let that settle. But we'll be up and running again in November, at least for the energy work. And then hopefully in 2021, we'll be able to have people come down again and start working with us.
So people, they'd come down, it's usually like workshops, like specific amounts of time, or it's custom tailored to someone's needs?
Yeah, we used to do the custom tailored, but I found it was really hard on our schedule. We really need to honor like our own time off and having a little bit more regularity. So now going forward, we're going to have either 4-day workshops or 5-day workshops. So like a 7-day duration or a 9-day duration and no more than that. I don't think anything more than that is necessary. I think if the work is more targeted, we can not have to have so many ceremonies, so that's what we're doing now. And then once in a while, we do dietas as well. So usually twice a year. But we seem to have a group that continues to diet with us. So there's not a lot of open spaces that come up. So maybe in the future, when we have more space, we're hoping to have a friend come down and facilitate with us. And then eventually maybe have, not where we have a lot of people come, but maybe like 7 or 8 at maximum, so that we can have at least room to hire one more person and, work with a few more people. But finding space in the valley is very difficult. We live in the Beverly Hills, they call it the valley, and everyone wants to be here and there's no houses available. But I get it. Like, it's a beautiful place to live and I'm really grateful for being here.
So if someone came down, what would that look like? Like there's flower baths and consultations and they're drinking ayahuasca or they're working with other plants?
For the regular ceremony workshops, people will do a consulta online first to make sure that we get their medical forms and screen them to make sure that everything's okay. And once that's passed, then they come down. Usually we try to keep it pretty informal, like letting things come up as they need to. We'll sit around in the backyard and smoke mapachos and, okay, what are you here for? What are you really working on? And
is that kind of weird when you offer someone a mapacho right off the bat?
You smoke, yeah. But the funny part is, like, the more and more I do this work, I'm less inclined to encourage lots of conversation before, especially about the process, because a lot of it's like, we're going to see what's there in ceremony anyway. It's good to have a bit of a background story, but sometimes like less is more. And it sounds weird, but like as I go forward, like my dream, I keep seeing this like ashram style place where like people come and they're in a place where like they want to actually be in silence, where the workshop is a silent workshop. And like, okay, if someone really needs a consultation, okay, well, let's wait 24 hours. Can you figure it out on your own first before having to open your mouth and sit and ask for help? Because sometimes those excruciating 24 hours where you are by yourself is the most teaching, most empowering, most wonderful place. When you come to the answer on your own is way better than sitting and trying to have someone else bring it to you. I don't know. I think that would be an amazing type of container, but it definitely takes someone who's gotten to a certain level of competency with this work to be able to handle themselves, maybe say when they have a really rough ceremony the night before and say, yeah, I think I can still handle it that the next 24 hours. I might need to sit with this on my own, but I'm okay with that. This is why I signed up for. That degree of seriousness, I suppose, is what, if I could call out to the universe of people who want to come, please come, serious people. And maybe that's a dream for the future. I have a friend in Kathmandu who works at a monastery for 20 years, and he wants to come here and start working with us. And maybe the tie of the Buddhism with the medicine, maybe there's somewhere to go with that, in a really grounded way, slow way, because this path is patience. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Talking about COVID, what was that experience like for you? I mean, that's obviously, I think probably a lot of people aren't familiar, but I think an article came out in the Telegraph recently and saying that essentially Peru has had the strictest lockdown of any country, and now it leads the world in excess deaths as well. So, it's been pretty intense here.
Yeah. I think Felix mentioned in his podcast, we were booked for an entire year ahead, which is pretty awesome. We were like, wow, like things are really picking up. We were afraid to go on our own, but we've made a success of it. And then COVID came. So at the time when it came, we were in dieta for the first 2 weeks of March. So it was really a good challenge during that dieta to not pick up the phone and go like, is the world falling apart? no, don't look at the phone. Is the world, but we also had guests that we had to make sure we could get out kind of thing. So that was part of my dieta, was actually working with that distraction. So literally we had guests that were supposed to leave maybe after, I think, the 16th, but we're like, you know what? We feel actually that maybe it's good for you to get out of here right away. And it's funny, they did. And like 2 days later, everything shut down. And so all of our plans completely shut, imagine like all the deposits have to go back. And as I see it, it's important to have that money, and we paid everybody back, which is wonderful. But of course, like there's that loss of momentum, So now what do we do? So we took a month to just do nothing, which was fantastic. But then we started working with people in the local community because we'd been so busy with the work of people flying in that we actually hadn't had time to work with like our neighbors and the people around us. So we've been doing that for quite a while. Just now we've taken a break for September. So we've still been working, but it's different working in your community versus having people come in and then leave kind of thing. So that may continue for another half a year or another year. We really don't know. Things are so up in the air right now, but I think of my friend in Kathmandu, and he says, Safa, the monks are all so happy right now because they get all this time to practice. So they're walking around smiling because they don't have all these other obligations when there's usually like students at the monastery. And through the quarantine, there was a lot of resistance, but as things have been going along, like I get what they're saying. And now I'm actually working less in the community and giving myself more space to practice and to cultivate more energy and to cultivate more meditation time and all these sorts of things that I might not have had the time to do. So now a whole bunch of things are opening up because there's most time to devote to meditation, practice, breath work, all these sorts of things that are really important to have the power and the capacity to actually able to do things, to change things. The greater capacity you have, like your Dantian, as you know, it's like one of the most important pieces of us as magical, powerful beings, and it's our battery. And if that's low and we don't cultivate it, like we're not very effectual. So to me, cultivation of that particular piece every day has to happen. But I wasn't doing that when the quarantine started. Now I know.
And that can be sometimes a tough thing too, right? Is finding that balance of, obviously when you're in that role of helping people, of working with people, it can be so all encompassing that sometimes it's in a way hard to find the time to look after yourself even, or do that work. Yeah,
it is. Till you get a little bit more fierce about your boundaries. Sometimes I've had to change jobs because I realized I couldn't keep up with the pace. A lot of younger people come, and I think I'm in my 40s now, and I'm getting a little bit more fierce about my energy. So it's like, okay, yeah, working with 4 people is better than working with 24, working in my home and not doing 3 ceremonies in a row. Like I don't do that anymore, unless there's some sort of like, it's happened a few times, but you have to kind of navigate your path in a way where you can set that up. And it's difficult. This is it's a field where I feel a lot of people are very interested in joining. We get lots of requests of people wanting to come and learn how to facilitate and these sorts of things. Because the work's so amazing. Like it's spreading, and there's so much more awareness of things now up north and in Europe and these sorts of things. And people want to devote their lives to service. And I think that's so freaking amazing, but it's a very difficult job to get into. Like, how do you have the skills to handle a room full of people psychedelically freaking out when you haven't really like gone to school for it, or you haven't really, So, and I mean, the best way is just to jump in, but to have somebody there with you who knows what they're doing. And I've seen you're really good at that, of watching you work with other facilitators and guide them along. And that's important, to have a good experienced guide there while you're learning. But you've got to throw yourselves in the trenches. You can't learn this from a book. It can't be something that's academic, I feel anyway. I feel to be really well-rounded in this work. Yes, the academia part is really important, but also putting yourself in the trenches so that you know what to do when someone's in level 5 freak out, Yeah. But I encourage people, if they are interested in trying this work, like call out to the different centers, offer yourself to volunteer, getting yourself in there and seeing really shows you if work is for you or not, because you have to be able to hold your center when someone is screaming in your face or these sorts of things, and that's not for everybody. to be fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Is there anything else you want to touch on?
I don't think so. I just actually really just wanted to thank you for having me here, and really your podcast is getting out there, and I'm really happy to see that, and I love the content, and yeah, I hope people continue to listen and to download your podcast, and yeah, there's a lot of like really good information there, and you're really having interesting people on, so thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you. It's because of people like you coming on and just really sharing. I mean, that was really the reason I created it, was just, as you said, there's only one way to learn, and that's to jump into the fire. And it's interesting because I had wanted to do a podcast for a long time, but it never happened because I was in the fire. Well, exactly. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it is. It's interestingly just because of COVID now, I actually have the time to do it. So whenever I do jump back into the fire, hopefully that happens again. But hopefully finding some sort of balance and still being able to do this and work as well. I mean, I think about like my main teacher, Ernesto. I think about him doing a podcast. There's no way. Like the guy's working, almost 24/7.
Yeah.
Literally, even in that dream space.
Exactly.
And so it's, but yeah, it's, for me, it's great to give people an opportunity to really share, because I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and it's much different when someone has an embodied experience of really working.
Well, I think, a lot of the people that have worked, say, at a place like the temple, I mean, like that is the trial by fire. You learned so much in that, and I think there's so many rich, juicy experiences for people who are curious about medicine to hear the balance of both sides. Like, there's all these wonderful light and love things, but hey, you have to be prepared for these things to experience too. Are you ready for that? And being really honest about both sides, so people have a much more balanced perspective about what the work, at least down here in Peru, is like, what they're getting into. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Safa. And I wish you and Felix all the best.
Thank you
and
so
hopefully
much.
Things will begin to kind of come back, and flights seems like they're going to open. And,
we can get back to work in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed that. As always, go on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, Apple Podcasts, starred rating and a review. That, again, really helps with the algorithms, and it really helps to support this show. Even if you can't give financially, that really helps to get the show out to a broader audience. And if you can support financially, that's greatly appreciated. Patreon is a really good option. Again, with a subscription, a small monthly fee, you get access to a lot of added benefits, early access to shows, Q&As, and extended interviews. And like I said, with this one, Safa goes into some practices that are really beneficial for her, a breath work practice, and also a practice of making offerings. So I think you guys would really enjoy that. So thank you all for tuning in. I've got some good guests coming up. Hopefully my friend Marav is going to come on. She's kind of my partner in crime who I work with running dietas. She's trained a long time in this lineage of working with tobacco. And then hopefully I'm going to be getting some of my Shipibo friends back on, Leela and her partner Damian, and potentially Leela's sister Laura also. Also my friend Tanya, who I've worked with for a long time, and her partner, who's another Shipibo named Romulo. So some good guests coming up. Thank you guys, and I will see you in the next episode.